Welcome everyone, I'm Simon DeMaid. I'm a board director of Milton Keynes Business Leaders Partnership. This is now the third interview in MKBLP's series of Zoom interviews that we've been bringing to our members during lockdown. Previous interviews have included Ruby Palmer talking with the CEO of Semlep, Hilary Chipping, as well as Dr. Julie Mills speaking with Ian Stewart, the CEO of Destination MK. Today it's my turn, and I'm lucky enough to be speaking with the Chief Executive of Abbeygate Developments Limited, Clive Faine. For those who aren't aware, Clive is also the chair of Semlep Property Development, Investment and Infrastructure Delivery Group. So Clive, I'd like to welcome you today on behalf of MKBLP, and thank you very much indeed for taking the time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today. So Clive, before I move on, can I just ask, how has lockdown been for you, and are you well?
Well, I'm well, thank you very much indeed. It's strange when you get to my age and you've not experienced the lockdown and you've enjoyed coming into the office every day and actively engaging, then it's strange. But I think we've got to live with it. We're accommodating it, and it's fine. What I do find is interesting, though, is that when you go on these Zoom meetings, that looking at the backdrop that people have behind them has become a kind of not cult status, but that's the first thing I do, and I think yours is very exciting, but I won't ask you what's there.
Well, there's some corporate branding and also some cases of port, which I've slowly been working my way through during lockdown, Clive. And if you were here, I'd open a bottle for you now.
Right, okay, that's fine.
I do have a few questions that I'd like to ask you, mostly in relation to the impact that COVID-19 has had on the property and construction market, as well as your own business. Is that okay with you, Clive?
Sure, yeah, fine.
So, well, last week you will have seen that the construction industry officially gave the green light to begin operating again. So how are building companies managing to do that safely? And do you think that there's been sufficient guidance on safety measures?
I think on the guidance side, the government have issued comprehensive guidance. It's 31 pages on the construction industry on its own, and there's another 2 or 3 sections of it. It's an interesting and exciting read. I mean, it focuses in obviously on distancing, and that is a great concern when you're building buildings, whether they're houses or commercial properties. It's a challenge, and that's going to be the big issue. But in terms of the guidance, yes, the guidance is fairly firm. They've also been, I think, very positive to give companies a template in terms of a risk assessment, which they can complete, and indeed, if they're more than, I think it's 5 employees, circulate to the staff. So it does indicate a very clear guidance. Of course, the devil is always in the detail as to how that guidance is met, as it were. In terms of construction industry, yes, it's reopening. It's very selective. It's those projects which obviously were stalled, and they are now slowly reopening. And frankly, each major contractor and developer is kind of finding their way forward now. But there are issues in terms of both the number of employees that are going to come back in that have been currently furloughed. There's problems obviously on supply. I think the general feeling is that there were worries that there would be a lot of problems of their product supply. Actually, the feeling at the moment is that that's probably not going to be a serious problem. But at the core question, yes, it's starting again. That's really good news, but it's very much early days yet to see how that's going to have impact, as it were, Sam.
Yeah, it's good from my perspective. I've been advising lots of clients on this area, and suddenly we've all had to become health and safety specialists almost overnight, haven't we? Because we need to abide by the government guidance, which has been very good in relation to safety measures, but it's making sure that those risk adjustments are actually in place before we get people back on site. That I think is going to be difficult, and will mean a slow start, but at least we're seeing a start back to work, aren't we?
Yeah, as I say, I think that the positive side of it is the construction industry is now becoming open for business, and we just got to see how it goes from there. But is it going to be easy? Absolutely not, because it's not it gets to. So there's going to be a lot of things that everybody's got to learn, and it's going to be a discipline, but it's got to be, and it's happening, and I think that's a very positive side of it.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. Next question, Clive. If you can cast your mind back that far, but prior to the pandemic, Milton Keynes was tipped to see a strong property price in terms of growth over the next few years. What are your thoughts on that forecast now? And can you see that changing dramatically in light of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, the housing market has just reopened, and probably we'll talk about that in one of the other questions. So again, It's early days. The reality of the delivery of housing numbers in MK has actually stayed remarkably strong. In essence, the numbers roughly, with thanks to John Palmer, who's the head of planning at Milton Keynes Council, 2,000 completions against a target of 1766 in housing, and a further 2,250 units under construction. So the pipeline is there. What's going to happen to house prices? I think without any doubt there will be a drop. The best case predictions, that's the right phraseology, is a drop of 5 to 10% in house prices. The worst case is probably 25 to 30 or more percent, and it depends on who you listen to and the arguments they're putting forward as to what the impact will be. So yes, there will be, without any doubt, a drop in prices. Will that last? Will we have a V-shaped recovery? Very unlikely. But you've got to say Milton Keynes has always been a strong player in our area, and indeed nationally, and there's no reason why it wouldn't continue, subject of course to whether house builders are going to take us in relation to house building. So again, I think there has to be a drop, but how strong that drop is, there's a number of factors that I think one of the other questions will probably start to talk about that. But that's really where we are, and it's not a bad news scenario as far as Milton Keynes delivery is concerned. But a price drop, yes, for sure.
Do you think it feels different this time around to the recession? It does for me when I look at the businesses out there.
Fundamentally, yes. I mean, there is no the problem of 2008 was a funding problem, was a banking problem, was a confidence problem. This is a virus problem, and it's a virus which is obviously proving itself very difficult to deal with. So these are uncharted territories, and we've just got to live with it. But again, people are very resilient when it comes to house buying, in particular. And one's got to say, never write off the interest of UK to be homeowners. I would probably again talk about the rented sector perhaps later, which is potentially staying quite strong. So I mean, I think one's got to say the Englishman's home is his castle, and at the moment I don't think that's going to change. But it's really too early to know how that's going to roll out, as it were.
Okay, well, sticking on the same theme and looking at house builders' operating margins moving forward, how do you think they'll recuperate from this, and how soon, in your view?
I think the answer is yes, they will. But you've got to differentiate when we talk about house builders. The major players in the industry, the public companies, the deliverers of the majority of the new houses, yes, they have been able to restructure themselves mostly in a way that closed sites down. Now they're beginning to open up. They're meeting the market demand that was there. In fact, the contracts that were sold. I mean, you know, one of the stats which I find is quite interesting is that the lockdown held 300. You may have better figures than I, but 373,000 transactions, housing transactions in the UK, were put in limbo. That's an enormous number. So I think that's got to work its way through. But back to the house builders. So the big players, yes, they have got a game plan. It will mean, in my view, there's unlikely to be a strategic acquisition of land. There's enough in the pipeline for most of these major house builders. And it will mean, obviously, that the numbers that they will be able to deliver, back to the earlier question, are
Yeah.
likely to be reduced. But they don't know at the moment, I think, exactly how they're going to be able to gear up production on the same way we talked about in the first question. But I think they will be okay. And my big worry has always been the SME builder.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons, they've always struggled to get funding. And the other issue that's relation to the house builders, the major players are in the main well funded. The
Yeah.
SMEs depend upon bank funding and also a good and reasonably mobile market where you've got a capacity to be able to, in fact, secure mortgages for new houses. So I think the SME builders will find it particularly a difficult challenge. There was a difficult challenge with SME house builders before the pandemic. That's going to stay that's going to stay the same, and
Yeah.
probably will get worse. That's a pity, and I don't see an easy way out of that for the smaller house builder. And that's probably the pain that one's going to have to go to live through in that regard if you happen to be a smaller house builder.
Okay. Moving on to the government, and I'm not here to bash the government at all, because I think some things have been communicated to businesses very well by the government during the outbreak of COVID-19. But in your view, has there been enough clear communication on funding support for the construction industry during this period?
I think the answer has got to be yes. But the engagement with it and the implementation of it is not easy when it comes to the when you're trawling the internet all the time, and .gov.uk, as excellent as it is, there's a lot of detailed stuff there, and therefore and it's also the mechanism of gearing up to make application. Of course, the furloughing of the employee side of it was we've now got new or emerging new guidelines in terms of both timescale, but there's no certainty on the amount of contribution expected from businesses going forward. But we'll see. But I have to say, my easy answer to that one is yes. You've got to dig deep, and you've got to be patient about it, and that can be very frustrating, particularly for the entrepreneurial side of the market, which likes to get things done as quickly as you can. But having said that, I personally, I don't think that with, as you say, it's not a knocking government scenario. I think they've done what they can on this one, and but there are issues there, but I wouldn't exaggerate those issues unless I happen to be in the application form that isn't being processed, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. Okay, thank you, Clive. In her recent interview, Ruby Palmer interviewed Hilary Chipping, and Hilary told MKBLP that the initial focus in the delivery of the industrial strategy to boost the Oxford-Cambridge arc was going to be on infrastructure, plus the development of commercial premises. But due to the pandemic and the need now to focus on other areas such as digital infrastructure, the focus of the industrial strategy is likely to change. Could you share your thoughts or any insight that you've got on that?
Yeah, these are my personal thoughts on where it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, being involved in some ways with the with all of the stakeholder discussions on the delivery of the ARC. I think there's two schools of thought. There's one school which is being promoted not just on the ARC, but in terms of physical infrastructure, to say, let's get on with it. Now is the time to deliver these big physical infrastructure projects. With acknowledging that digital will now take a substantial, not proportional, but digital will be crucially important. There's the other side of the equation that says, why are we worrying about physical infrastructure when people's habits, particularly to and from work, are likely to materially change as a result of coming out of the pandemic? And if that is a fundamental change, then why are we worrying about physical infrastructure? And if you listen to and you kind of get involved, as I do, into kind of some of the debates on both sides of that, there's a strong case for both. We don't know the answer to that. and indeed SEMLEP is going to be very strong in working with the local authorities in the patch to try and come up with the answer to that one. At the other side of that equation, which is actually quite an important one, is that the ARC is so successful already in terms of the power, economic power of not just Oxford, Cambridge, and Milton Keynes, but all of the other towns that are and communities that are within that ARC. But our problem is we've never had, if you like, the support of a government in terms of being able to springboard on the back of the devolution agenda. And without any doubt, that approach has stood some of the bigger towns, such as, for example, Northern Powerhouse towns, such as Midlands Engine. These organisations that are mostly private sector led have been extremely strong in their discussion with government about how we move forward from the pandemic. The jury's out. Government, I think, are thinking about it. Ministers are thinking about it. But some form of further devolution, both of powers and funding, the mayoral position, and also a regional approach. You know, there is some discussions, I'm not talking out of turn here, about regional recovery boards, about spatial strategies on a regional basis. And therefore, what I'm saying is, I think the ARC is already a strong deliverer of growth. Whether it is strong enough to be able to persuade government to go the extra 9 yards, as it were, to deliver all of the physical infrastructure when we know that digital will become crucial, I think we've got some way to go on that one. And I think that's really the position we've got now. Sadly, and quite understandably, a lot of the attention, both of government and of the local authorities, is how to deal with the problem of the pandemic. So clearly your mind moves away from other things, particularly when you're looking at how you keep the systems running, as it were. So if you say to me, my prophecy is that, and it probably, well, in many ways, I think it may be proved wrong, but we'll go for that. Is that I think that with the strength and weight of the governance structure that the ARC should be able to deliver between the public and private sectors, there is a very strong case for continuing to deliver physical infrastructure, but it may be different to the way that the evolving in physical infrastructure has been thought about in terms of the ARC proposals, if that's the right way to phrase it, before we had the pandemic. Things will change and plans need to vary to meet that change. So I think that's my kind of overview on it. And for those that argue for both physical infrastructure, then, you know, it's lobbying the ministers, the local MPs, and their local authorities. For those that think there will be a fundamental change, particularly in transport, equally, now's the time to lobby to say, okay, this is what we think will change. And there's no doubt that all of the, I mean, MK in particular, MK's 2050 strategy, its first consultation, its consultation closes on Friday. And the council have already said very clearly that as subsequent to that consultation and looking at what everybody's saying about it, it's early days to work out for MK what that really means for the long term in terms of coming out of the pandemic. So the commitment, as I see it from the council, is to very much say, look, we understand that, of course, and we will respond so we can engage about what needs to change in our plans or our strategies as a result of the pandemic. So fairly positive. I think we know where we're going on that overall. But it's going to be events, dear boy, events type.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you hit on a theme there about how the business world has switched quite dramatically and quite quickly to working remotely and working digitally. Something that we've had to do, lots of our clients have had to do, and our members at MKBLP feel at the moment that the face of the traditional office might have changed permanently as a result of this. If organisations need less office space in the future, how do you see that the impact that COVID-19 will have on commercial properties in the future?
Yeah, I think again, one of the next questions relates to impact on certain sectors within the market. But if we're looking at the business world and office space, again, it's a very interesting challenge or conundrum, as it were. I mean, the stats, and these are not my stats; these are Collier's stats, who are an eminent firm of surveyors. 11.8 million people in the UK work at their desk. 60% of those 11.8 million couldn't work under a 2-meter rule. So you finish up with, so excuse the stats, but all great. 7.8 million people will therefore work from home if you keep the same office space. Well, that is going to happen. Also, I find quite interesting, again, depends who's doing the stuff, but it's interesting, is 81% of employees surveyed were quite happy to carry on working for at least 1 day a week from home. So initially, what we're getting is that kind of thought process. Yes, there will be more working from home. The contrary to that. Oh, and by the way, at the end of the day, the major office players are clearly suffering in terms of occupation. I mean, Land Securities, again, they've made this comment openly. Only 10% of their office portfolio at the moment is occupied. Now that, excuse me, is a huge impact. The other side of it is there will be a lot of reconfiguration. There has to be. There will be a different way of working. And the other slightly interesting dynamic is, of course, if you want to get the same number of people in the office space you had before, then you'll need more floor space. So actually, what you then finish up with is potentially more space needed and a rent rise. So you've got these two push and pulls, at the moment, quite difficult ones to kind of balance. I think without any doubt, working from home will become an established pattern where you can do it and where you have the home infrastructure to accommodate it. And you have, or your company has, an IT knowledge that helps you to deliver that. So it'll favour the large players, I think. But without any doubt, having said that, if you look at the City of London, there are more tower cranes building office space at this moment in time than has been for a long, long period. And they're actually now going back to work to finish those off. So it's going to be quite interesting to see whether that way happens. The other side, of course, is, and I'm not sure that's part of the question, the dynamics of Milton Keynes are its enviable capacity to be within close proximity of London, although transport will obviously be an issue, and the availability, inverted commas, potentially of headquarters location. That's going to be very interesting as to what happens next in terms of that kind of thought process. But I think at the end of the day, summary would be from my end, yes, there will be a lot more home working. It will refine itself into a kind of balance. Does that mean it's the end of the office block as we know it? No, I don't think that will be the case, but there will be a lot of reappraisal at this moment for major companies in particular, understanding what space they need.
Yeah, I think that's my view as well. Looking at this closely as an employment specialist, as I have done, you kind of see everybody.
Sorry, I must bow to you on this one, Simon. So
no, everybody got a little bit.
Comments.
Everyone got a little bit excited about working from home initially during lockdown, and slowly but surely over the last 2 to 3 weeks, I think my colleagues and my clients are going a little bit stir crazy, and are really looking forward to going back to the office. And that seems to be, I guess, I'd say the overwhelming majority at the moment. All of them saying it would be nice to do 1 or 2 days at home, but actually I want to do 3 or 4 days in the office. So I think bricks and mortar is still going to have a real role to play. in everybody's
Yeah,
future.
I think it will. And the other thing we all have to remember, and it's something that's very difficult to remember, is that human beings need engagement with each other.
Yeah,
And there is, you've got to say, I don't get too profound at all, but you know where I'm coming from on this. At the end
yeah,
of the day, humanity only exists because we engage with one another, and the physical tactility of that, as it were, is crucially important for everybody's well-being.
it
We
is.
have not
Yeah,
seen yet the full impact of, it's Mental Health Week. I got that
yeah,
terminology wrong this week. And at the end of the day, it's, you've got to say the lockdown is going to cause an enormous amount of stress. And I think, particularly in business wise,
yeah.
getting back to some kind of balance. I'm not saying the old normal, but getting back to some kind of balance where you can engage, and indeed you can go out and maybe have more than a takeaway coffee would be quite welcome for a lot of people.
Yeah, and we're on the verge of that, aren't we? I think the government has rolled
I
out
think so.
its plans, and there's a little bit more transparency around that now, which is good
Yeah,
news.
yeah.
So, Clive, we talked a little bit about the strain on corporate occupiers of leasehold premises. Haven't necessarily focused on retail and leisure, but they have been badly hit. Do you know whether businesses are successfully managing to secure cuts or delays to rent payments? What's your view on that?
It's probably the biggest question at the moment that is
Yeah,
causing stress in the commercial marketplace. There are a number of sectors, particularly retail food stores and big sheds, logistics sheds,
yeah,
that are in good shape because of the reality of their businesses. There are smaller ones like bike shops that are I'm not saying they're having a great time. That's probably the wrong phraseology, but
yeah.
they are able to open and they are selling and they are
Yes,
retailing.
they are. Yeah,
So there are sectors that are not suffering. We talked about offices, so I won't repeat those. But the push and pull at the moment, particularly on retail, leisure, and hospitality, is huge.
yeah,
There is an endeavour by the commercial property, the landlords. If I use this, got to be careful. This landlord and tenant, it tends to pull tensions. But the landlords and indeed some of the key tenants are engaging with one another to try and look at the mechanism to deal with the fact that there are clear issues, particularly in the sectors we've just discussed, of being able to pay the rent for the next quarter.
yeah,
Equally, the property business, commercial investment business, lives on rental income. So, as we all know, getting that balance is crucial. And that balance can either be by negotiation, or it can get very stressful. And there are read the daily paper, the daily papers or the weekly property papers, and you will see where the negotiations have actually become quite stressful.
right.
I think there's one side of it which is difficult for, and really one shouldn't, hopefully, I'm saying common sense, but commercial logic is that in a lot of cases one has to find the right balance. Clearly, the pressure point will be the June quarter date,
Yeah,
when at the moment, I don't know what the numbers are likely to be. Nobody does at the present time, but it's very unlikely that there'll be a further reduction in the rent payments being made between landlord and tenant.
yeah,
So the strain is huge. Hopefully, it's a period which, the government, to be fair to them, they are discussing. They're looking at mechanisms. They've offered business rate incentives, reliefs, more for tenants obviously than landlords. They've also brought in a measure to stop forced enforcement at the moment. So they are looking at trying to get that balance right.
yeah,
It's probably, of the questions that we've just discussed, it's probably the one that worries me. I think it worries our industry the most, because you need both. You
yeah,
need tenants paying rent, you need landlords that are receiving rent, and you need the two to work as well as they can together.
yeah,
And that's not going to be easy. and I think there will be huge challenges. And nobody wants to see the number of, unfortunately, in the hospitality industry, without mentioning any names, there's further businesses going into CVA, and these are household names which are, really painful when you look back at how successful they've been. But equally, the landlords deserve some sympathy because their business model has enabled space to be made available that met a market demand. And the hotel industry as well, of course, as soon as that can come out of lockdown, again, will be huge. If you look at Milton Keynes, a number of exciting hotels are actually, most of them are now clad in, but they've got an enormous amount of finishing to do. And of course, they've got to be able to reopen. So of all of the concerns that I think one has got looking forward, that's the one that I think is probably going to cause the biggest strain. But we just got to get through it. And so I've been hopefully realistic, but also more positive about where we're going to go in the future. That one is a huge challenge that will carry pain for us for a long time. But we've got it. We've just got to meet that challenge between all parties.
Yeah, and I guess that there is some positivity if you look to the Far East and look to Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, countries like that, or even Germany on mainland Europe. That kind of retail and leisure is slowly starting to trickle back in, isn't it? So that there may be a little bit more optimism than we initially thought.
Yes, as you're right. As we progressively come out of lockdown, the decisions are taken as to which, if you like, sectors can open up and how they will open up and how they will run their business. Then, of course, that's that's what we've got to see. But the examples from across the world, there are some that are showing the way that you can go successfully. So we just got to see where that takes us. But it's huge. But we've got it. I think the other interesting thing, and the retailers are the key players on this, is that what we don't know, nobody knows, is how long it will take the shopper to return to the shopping mall. Let me keep it nice and simple. That, if you listen to some of the discussions, it's like they're forecasting only 20% will return to physical shopping. I think if you talk to my wife, she will not agree with that because she wants to get shopping as soon as she can. But getting that balance now is again going to be quite difficult because people have got to be confident and bottom line, comfortable that going back to the shopping centre is what they always enjoy doing. Now they've got to do it in a new environment, and it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts on the matter we just discussed.
I completely agree. It's a conversation that I have in my own household about when would you be confident going back into a shop or getting on an aeroplane, and the answer is I don't know. I genuinely don't know. When would I be comfortable going to watch a game of cricket or going to a gig? And it depends on how safe this country gets, doesn't it? And we're kind of on the horns of, I think, getting to a scenario where we're all going to feel a little bit safer heading into summer, hopefully.
Yes, I mean, as you say, I mean, my hobby and sport over the years has been cycling, and we in Milton Keynes we've had enormous support from everybody in terms of where it's at. But effectively, more people are riding bikes, but the way we're riding bikes is now so constrained that the days of the good old club ride are at the moment just not available. And what's great is people are riding their bikes more, and there are more of them, and the roads are less congested. But having said that, riding 2 meters apart, 2 meters behind one another, has its own frustrations. Let me not. Hillary, if she's listening to this from some level, say, "Oh God, he's not talking about cycling again." But there we go. So as you rightly say, whatever sport you've got, unless maybe it's golf or tennis, you've got to come out of lockdown in a sensible way and we've got to get back into everybody. All of us want to go back and see the Dons playing football.
Yeah.
In Milton Keynes, sorry to Northampton, Luton, and everybody else. But we all want to go and see the stadium full again, and hopefully that's going to happen as soon as we can. And I had an email from Pete Winkleman the other day saying, he's in good shape, and we're all looking forward to that happening. So sport is an enormous contributor, and bringing that back in a safe way is going to be a challenge. It's a different challenge to the business challenge, but it's a huge challenge, and one we've just got to hopefully get right.
Great, thanks, Clive. Clive, do you have time for one more question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know whether this interview is going to get cut and shut or whatever they call it in the sliced and diced, but I'll leave Emma to decide that one. But yeah,
leave
question, no problem.
Leave it to the powers that be, Clive. So it may be the $1 million question, but what are your thoughts on the immediate future for both commercial and residential property developers? What sort of strategies do you think they should be implementing now to help them bounce back from this situation?
It really is too early to know. One has to say it has to be a very cautious way forward. We talked earlier about some of the major players will be taking a programmed view in terms of how they see their business coming out of lockdown and new starts on both housing and less so on commercial. For the local developer, it's got to be a very cautious approach. If you are building or were building and were developing, you need to finish what you've got. If you're looking at new projects, you've got to be very, very cautious. And I think it will take a long period of time for us to understand the market, where the market is going to take us, and at what point we're extremely confident that now's the time to move. Property has always been cyclical. Getting that cycle right the next time round is going to be even more difficult. And we also need, obviously, on the housing market, it needs the funding. Mortgages have got to be available. Banks have got to be willing to lend, and we've got to see property values maintained. So there's no easy answer to that. I think it's a challenge. The only sector I do feel that will probably stay, it will be impacted, but private rented sector, residential, is it's more resilient in terms of the market, and therefore I see PRS as it's identified as being a market to go. So it's really early days. Certainly, one's got to say one has to be very cautious about the way forward. But there's always opportunity. And as we said, when the 2008, 7-8 recession hit, everybody thought the world was going to end then. It hasn't, and in fact, the recovery was relatively strong over that period of time. So clearly, we will come out of this pandemic. It won't be an easy task, and there's going to be some hard choices. But my message has to be: it's a time for caution because of the profound uncertainties that are out there at the moment.
Thank you very much, Clive. I take away a lot from that. A lot of positivity in there as well. I know you used the word caution, but cautiously optimistic, I think, is how I read what you've said today.
I think cautiously optimistic, but realistic.
Realistic as well. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I hope you managed to get out there in a peloton, a safely formed peloton soon with your cycling buddies on the road. But on behalf of me and also on behalf of Milton Keynes Business Leaders Partnership, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day today to speak with us. And I really look forward to sharing a glass of port with you soon when we're safely able to do so. Thanks, Clive.
That's great. Thanks a lot. Take care.